Hey YNR fans! Welcome to YNR Trends, your young and the restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Nick sat alone in his living room with the folded letter in his hands, his heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. The handwriting across the envelope was familiar, painfully so, and for a moment he couldn't bring himself to break the seal. It was Noah's. His son's last words, a final message that arrived when Nick least expected it, threatening to change everything he thought he knew about their fractured family. The weight of it seemed heavier than any business deal, any affair, any betrayal he'd faced before. Genoa City was built on secrets, but this one felt different, personal, destructive, and final. When Nick finally opened the letter and began to read, his chest tightened with every sentence, every stroke of Noah's pen dragging him further into a pit of regret, shame, and anger. Noah's words were raw, almost venomous, as if written in a fury that could no longer be held back. He blamed his father for years of neglect, for chasing women in power while failing to understand his own son's struggles. He confessed to feeling invisible, unworthy, and tossed aside while Nick fought Victor's wars or tried to control Sharon's choices. But what hurt most was Noah's insistence that he had found out something so vile, so disgusting, that he couldn't live with it anymore. Nick's hands shook as he read the lines where Noah mentioned Claire and Holden, describing what he'd uncovered in words that made Nick's stomach twist. Noah's disgust was palpable, his outrage bleeding through every line. He had stumbled onto a secret that was never meant to come out, and in doing so, he had left his father with the unbearable responsibility of facing it alone. Claire had only just begun to carve out a fragile space for herself in Genoa City. The Newman family wasn't quick to forgive, and even slower to trust, but she had been making progress, step by step, in winning over those she'd once hurt. Her past with Jordan, her manipulation, her lies, all of it lingered in the air whenever she walked into a room. Yet, in recent months, she had become close to certain people, including Holden. On the surface, their connection seemed harmless. To most, it looked like two broken souls finding comfort in one another, building something out of mutual pain and the hope of redemption. But Noah's letter revealed a darker truth, one that suggested their bond wasn't just unconventional, but disturbing. He accused them of keeping a secret so twisted that even he, who had seen the worst of his family's scandals, couldn't stomach it. Nick kept rereading the letter, searching for clarity, for exaggeration, but every time he landed on the same sentences describing Claire and Holden's relationship, his blood ran cold. It wasn't just a matter of romance or betrayal. It was something that crossed lines of morality and decency, something that threatened to destroy reputations and shatter lives. Noah's disgust was so intense that it radiated off the page, making Nick feel like he could hear his son shouting at him even though he was gone. For Nick, the letter became more than words on paper, it became a mirror. Every accusation Noah hurled at him about being absent, about ignoring the warning signs, about failing to protect him, echoed through Nick's mind as he thought about Claire and Holden. He had welcomed Claire into the family's orbit with cautious optimism, wanting to believe in second chances, but had he overlooked something glaringly wrong? Had Holden manipulated the situation, or had Claire chosen to engage in something so reprehensible that even Noah couldn't keep silent? Nick thought back to his strained relationship with Noah. They had moments of closeness, but more often than not, distance defined their bond. Noah had always seemed overshadowed by Nick's loyalty to Victor, by his siblings' more dramatic storylines, by Nick's inability to be fully present. Reading Noah's words now, Nick realized his son had been screaming for attention in quieter ways, and no one had truly listened. That final letter was both a confession and an indictment, leaving Nick to shoulder the blame for everything Noah carried in silence. The disgusting secret between Claire and Holden was like a poison threatening to seep through the cracks of Genoa City. If it came to light, it would ruin reputations beyond repair. Nick imagined the fallout, Victor's rage if he discovered that his attempt to give Claire a place in the family had backfired so horrifically, Sharon's heartbreak, already fragile from decades of betrayal and trauma, Summer and Kyle's confusion as yet another scandal tore through the Newman family's carefully crafted facade. And then there was the public aspect, the judgment, the headlines, the gossip. The Newmans were used to being in the spotlight, but this was different. This wasn't corporate sabotage or a business rivalry. This was something vile, personal, and morally indefensible. Holden, an outsider by Newman standards, had always walked the line between mysterious and suspicious. His connection to Claire was never entirely transparent, and many questioned his motives. But Noah's letter suggested there was more than manipulation at play. It implied that Holden had exploited vulnerabilities, crossing boundaries that should never have been approached. And Claire, who had been fighting to prove herself as more than the broken girl who once tried to destroy the Newmans, suddenly looked complicit in something far darker. Nick's mind spun as he considered his next move. If he confronted Claire and Holden directly, he risked alerting them that Noah had left behind evidence of their secret. If he confided in Victor, he risked setting off a chain reaction of violence and retribution that might spiral out of control. If he told Sharon, he risked breaking her in ways she might never recover from. Yet, if he kept silent, he betrayed Noah's last plea for him to take this seriously. Every option felt like a trap, and Nick couldn't find an escape route that didn't end in devastation. The letter also forced Nick to reflect on himself in ways he wasn't ready to. Noah had painted him as a man too wrapped up in his own chaos to notice the pain of others. And maybe he was right. Nick had spent years jumping from relationship to relationship, trying to find stability in fleeting romances while avoiding the deeper cracks in his family. He had fought Victor, aligned with him, betrayed him, and forgiven him in a cycle that never ended. He had been there for his children in moments, but never consistently. Reading Noah's words, Nick couldn't deny that his son's suffering had slipped through the cracks while he was too busy playing the role of hero or victim in his own endless dramas. Noah's final words about Claire and Holden weren't just an accusation, they were a demand. He wanted Nick to act, to stop letting secrets fester, to finally put an end to the cycles of silence and enabling that defined their family. But could Nick do it? Could he be the one to expose Claire and Holden, knowing it would destroy lives, or would he once again fall into the same pattern of denial and avoidance that Noah condemned him for? As night fell, Nick sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, the letter still unfolded on the table. He read it again and again, almost punishing himself with each pass. The words didn't change. Noah's disgust didn't soften. The reality didn't shift. Claire and Holden's secret was out, at least to him, and now he carried the burden of deciding what came next. The irony wasn't lost on him. His son had left him with a final responsibility, one that would either redeem him in Noah's memory or prove, once and for all, that Nick Newman wasn't the man he claimed to be. In Genoa City, every secret eventually surfaced. Lies always unraveled. The truth always clawed its way out, no matter how deeply buried. Nick knew this better than anyone, and yet, he found himself paralyzed. The disgusting secret between Claire and Holden was a ticking time bomb, and Noah's final letter was the fuse already lit. The analysis of this moment, of what it means for Nick, Claire, Holden, and the broader Newman family, goes beyond just the scandal. It forces a reckoning with cycles of betrayal, neglect, and moral compromise. Noah's words are a testament to the silent casualties of the Newman Empire, the children who grew up in the shadows of power plays and affairs, the people who bore the weight of their parents' mistakes. His final letter is more than just a revelation of Claire and Holden's secret, it is a condemnation of a family culture that breeds secrets in the first place. Nick, holding the letter, represents the pivot point. His next actions will decide whether Noah's pain leads to change or whether it becomes just another tragic footnote in the Newman saga. Claire and Holden's disgusting secret will not remain hidden forever, but how it comes to light, and who brings it into the open, will determine the shape of the fallout. Nick is left with a choice: carry the burden silently, or honor his son's final plea by finally exposing the truth, no matter how horrifying it may be. And so, with the night pressing in and silence settling heavy over the Newman ranch, Nick closed his eyes, the words of Noah's letter burned into his memory. There was no turning back now. The secret was out, and the only question left was who would survive when it exploded. The world of daytime drama thrives on moments of explosive confrontation, where years of simmering resentment, buried secrets, and tangled loyalties erupt into a single, defining scene. In the long and tumultuous history of The Young and the Restless, a series built upon the foundations of familial strife and romantic betrayal, few moments carry the raw, visceral weight of the altercation between Lily Winters and Phyllis Summers. The act itself, Lily punching Phyllis, was shocking in its physicality, a departure from the verbal sparring that typically characterizes their conflicts. But it was the 3 words she uttered immediately afterward that resonated with a profound and devastating finality, words that were not merely aimed at Phyllis but were intended to sear themselves into the conscience of Cain Ashby, the man caught between them. Those 3 words, break up with, though grammatically incomplete, formed a command so clear, so charged with emotional truth, that they forced Cain, and the audience, to confront the irreparable damage inflicted upon his marriage. This moment was not just a dramatic high point, it was the crystallization of a relationship's collapse, a pivotal juncture where love was ultimately suffocated by the cumulative weight of deception, enabling, and a fundamental failure to protect the sanctity of the marital bond. To understand the full impact of Lily's actions, one must first appreciate the complex history she shared with both Cain and Phyllis. Lily Winters, daughter of Neil Winters and Drusilla Barber, was raised with a strong sense of family loyalty and integrity, despite the many challenges she faced. Her relationship with Cain Ashby was a cornerstone of her adult life, a love story marked by extraordinary highs and devastating lows. They had faced amnesia, presumed deaths, business rivalries, and numerous infidelities, particularly on Cain's part. Each time, forgiveness had been a long and arduous road, but Lily had chosen to walk it, rebuilding their marriage on each occasion, often at great personal cost. This history made her not a naive victim, but a woman who had invested everything in a partnership that demanded constant vigilance and repair. Cain, for his part, was a character defined by his love for Lily but plagued by a weakness of character, a tendency toward self-pity and poor judgment that made him susceptible to manipulation. His transgressions were not merely acts of lust but profound betrayals of trust that chipped away at the foundation of their union. Phyllis Summers, on the other hand, has long been a force of chaos in Genoa City. A master manipulator with a history of scheming that impacted nearly every major family, her involvement with Cain was particularly toxic. It was not a simple affair born of passion, but a calculated entanglement where Phyllis often preyed upon Cain's vulnerabilities. She represented the very antithesis of the stability and loyalty Lily valued. Every interaction between Cain and Phyllis was a violation, not just of Lily's trust, but of the safe space a marriage is supposed to provide. The specific context leading to the punch was likely another in a long line of betrayals or manipulations, a situation where Phyllis had once again inserted herself into the Ashbys' lives, forcing a confrontation and exposing Cain's continued failure to erect firm boundaries. Lily's tolerance for this cycle of betrayal had been stretched to its absolute limit. The punch, therefore, was not an isolated act of violence but the physical manifestation of years of pent-up frustration, humiliation, and rage that she had swallowed for the sake of her family. The punch itself was a symbolic rupture. In the stylized world of soap operas, where conflicts are often waged with cutting remarks and legal maneuvers, a physical altercation signifies a point of no return. For a character like Lily, who typically wielded her intelligence and emotional strength as her primary weapons, resorting to physical violence indicated a complete loss of control, a moment where words had finally failed to convey the depth of her anguish. It was an act of pure, unadulterated catharsis, directed at the person she perceived as the external agent of her misery. However, the true brilliance of the scene lay in what followed. As Phyllis recoiled, the focus shifted instantly from the external foe to the internal conflict. Lily turned to Cain, and with a clarity that could only come from absolute emotional exhaustion, she delivered her 3-word ultimatum: break up with. The missing object of the preposition, me, was irrelevant because its meaning was terrifyingly clear. She was not telling him to break up with Phyllis. The implication was that his entanglement with Phyllis had become so central, so destructive, that it had effectively ended his marriage. She was commanding him to make a choice that she had already come to realize was inevitable. Those 3 words, break up with, were so powerful because they stripped away all pretense and exposed the core truth that Cain had been desperately avoiding. They were not a plea nor a negotiation, they were a diagnosis. In that moment, Lily was not speaking as a wounded wife begging for reassurance, but as a woman finally seeing her situation with devastating clarity. She was articulating the reality that Cain's relationship with Phyllis, in all its forms, whether emotional, financial, or merely circumstantial, had become the primary relationship in his life, and that her own position as his wife had been rendered obsolete by his actions and his failures. The words break up with implied that a union already existed that needed severing, and that union was the toxic bond between Cain and the chaos Phyllis represented. By framing it as a command, Lily seized back agency. For years, she had been reactive, responding to Cain's betrayals, forgiving them, and trying to rebuild. This was different. This was her proactively defining the terms of their end. She was no longer asking him to choose her, she was telling him that his inability to fully do so had already made the choice for him. For Cain, hearing those words would have been a moment of profound and painful regret, a regret born not from a single event but from the cumulative weight of his own failings. The regret would not simply be for the affair or the specific incident that prompted the punch, but for the entire pattern of behavior that led to this rupture. He would have regretted his weakness, his repeated susceptibility to Phyllis's manipulations, and his failure to prioritize Lily's peace of mind above all else. He would have regretted the times he dismissed her concerns as jealousy or insecurity, rather than recognizing them as the legitimate warnings they were. Most of all, he would have regretted the erosion of Lily's faith in him. He had witnessed her strength and her capacity for forgiveness time and again, and to see that well of forgiveness finally run dry, to see her love for him replaced by a cold, commanding resolve, would have been the ultimate consequence. The regret was for realizing, too late, that he had taken her love for granted, believing it to be an inexhaustible resource, and in doing so, he had exhausted it completely. The woman who had fought for him against all odds was now telling him to leave, and the 3-word command was the final verdict on his tenure as her husband. The scene's power also lies in its exploration of the dynamics of a relationship strained by external forces and internal weakness. A strong marriage operates as a fortress, with both partners committed to defending its walls against outside threats. Cain, however, had repeatedly left the gate open. He allowed Phyllis, the embodiment of a threat, to wander in and out of their lives at will. By failing to consistently and unequivocally choose Lily, by maintaining any form of connection with a known adversary, he effectively made Phyllis a third party in their marriage. Lily's command to break up with was an acknowledgement of this toxic triangulation. She was no longer willing to be part of a triangle. She was forcing Cain to confront the fact that he could not maintain a marriage with her while simultaneously being emotionally or situationally tied to Phyllis. The ultimatum highlighted the fundamental rule he had broken: in a marriage, especially one with a history of infidelity, the partner who has strayed must actively and visibly dismantle any connection to the third party. Cain's failure to do so, either through weakness, guilt, or a misplaced sense of obligation, made the eventual collapse inevitable. Furthermore, the moment transcends the specific characters and speaks to a universal truth about the breaking point of love and trust. Every relationship has its limits. The phrase break up with is so commonplace, so often heard in the context of high school romances or casual dating, that its usage here, in the wreckage of a deep, long-term, familial marriage, is jarring. It reduces the complex institution of marriage, with its shared children, history, and assets, to its most basic emotional core, a connection that can be severed by a simple command. This simplicity is what makes it so heartbreaking. Lily was not engaging in a complex debate about their future, she was issuing a primitive, emotional edict. She was stating that the connection was broken, and the only action left was the formal acknowledgement of that break. This resonates with anyone who has ever felt a relationship fracture beyond repair, where the love is not gone but has been transformed into something else, something too painful to sustain. In the broader narrative of The Young and the Restless, this moment served as a crucial turning point for Lily Winters as a character. It marked her evolution from a woman defined by her relationships, first as Neil Winters's daughter, then as Kane Ashby's wife, into an autonomous individual asserting her own boundaries. The punch was a rejection of the passive suffering often expected of wronged women in soap operas. It was a declaration that she would no longer be the long-suffering wife waiting for her husband to become the man she needed him to be. The 3 words that followed solidified this transformation, establishing her as the author of her own destiny, even if that destiny meant walking away from a great love. For Kane, it was the culmination of his tragic flaw, his weakness, and a moment of reckoning that would define his character's trajectory long after the immediate drama had passed. It was a lesson that love, no matter how strong, cannot survive without the steadfast protection of trust and respect. In conclusion, the scene in which Lily punches Phyllis and commands Kane to break up with is far more than a memorable piece of soap opera theatrics. It is a masterfully constructed emotional climax that lays bare the intricate mechanics of a relationship's demise. The physical violence is a symptom of a deeper sickness, but it is the verbal command that delivers the fatal diagnosis. Those 3 words serve as a devastatingly concise summary of years of pain, a final judgment on a marriage that could no longer withstand the toxins of betrayal and enabling. They forced Kane into a moment of acute regret, not for a single action, but for the entire pattern of behavior that led to the loss of a woman whose love he had undervalued. The moment stands as a powerful testament to the idea that even the most enduring loves have a breaking point, and that the most profound strength can sometimes be found not in fighting for a relationship, but in having the courage to finally, decisively, let it go.